Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the culmination of a one-year project called the Help Dante, Help Italy project, in which we had a Canadian sculptor, Timothy Schmalz, and an American translator, Daniel Fitzpatrick, who completely took all 100 cantos of Dante's Divine Comedy by storm. And we produced 3 books, we produced 100 emails, and we produced a great amount of awareness on this second Dante Day. The very first one began on March 25th. It was announced on March 25th, 2020. And we took off on that date. And here we are, March 25th, 2021, the Feast of the Annunciation. So the order of today is I'm going to introduce Bishop Richard Henning. He is an auxiliary bishop for the Diocese of Rockville Centre, New York, and he's going to lead us in prayer. And then I'll introduce Dr. Frank Ambrosio, who's an assistant professor of philosophy at Georgetown University.
Nel nome del Padre, del Figlio, e dello Spirito Santo. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord, creator of the universe, on this feast of the Annunciation, a feast which held a special place in the work of Dante. We celebrate the mystery of the Word made flesh, and we gather to honor the memory of a poet who immersed himself in the beauty of the Word and the mystery of the human heart. We praise you, Lord, for the gift of this man of art and faith, who continues to move our hearts across centuries and cultures. In this time when too many lack hope for the future, may this prophet of hope encourage us on our pilgrim journey. May this man of faith in the coherence of creation help us in our struggle for justice and compassion. Give us, Lord, the courage to find our way, to arise even from our suffering in the search for virtue. Let our words be light and hope. Inspire us to participate in the divine mystery and in the deepest longings of the human heart. Give us the gift of creating beauty and insight after the example and witness of this great man who was himself so inspired by your luminous presence. We make this prayer with all confidence through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you very much, Bishop Henning. Well, let me introduce Dr. Frank Ambrosio. And Frank Ambrosio is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Georgetown University. After studies in Italian language and literature in Florence, Italy, he completed his doctoral degree at Fordham University with a specialization in contemporary European philosophy. He is the founding director with Edward Maloney of the Georgetown University My Dante Project, a web-based platform for personal and collaborative study of Dante's comedy. He is a lead instructor for an ongoing web-based MOOC, that's a massive open online course, on Dante, offered by the edX Consortium of Universities, which currently has been utilized by over 25,000 students worldwide. You can find that at dante.georgetown.edu. His most recent book is Dante and Derrida, Face to Face, published by the State University of New York Press.
Sebastian, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to participate in this very special event, and second of all, for the project that I know you have so energetically and actively guided over the last year and involved Tim and Danny in so effectively for the purpose of celebrating this day, Dante Day 2021, as the beginning of the official celebration of the 700th anniversary of Dante's death in 1321. And as you noted, this day occurs on the Feast of the Annunciation because that coincides for us with the evening of Holy Thursday into Good Friday, on which Dante's fictive journey through the realms of life and death officially began in the year 1300. So it's a day filled with symbolic significance, but I want to add just one personal note before I introduce our two authors, that this morning I began viewing some of the results of searches for Dante Day and the celebrations that are occurring today around the world. And in all honesty, I have to confess that it was my wife who was channeling me those insights, because she's much better at navigating the web than I am. And she alerted me to the explosion of enthusiasm around the world, certainly first and foremost in Italy, and in Italy first and foremost in Florence. But we today are truly part of a white rose of human beings who are celebrating the joy that the Divine Comedy has brought into human life for 700 years now. And we're part of a large family participating in that. And that to me elevates personal excitement and enthusiasm to the level of a genuine joy in being part of a larger human community. With that, let me ask our two special guests today, Danny Fitzpatrick, our translator, and Tim Schmalz, our sculptor, who are the heart and soul of this project, to introduce themselves in a way that relates immediately to this occasion. Danny?
Thank you, Frank. And yeah, it's a real joy to be here today. So I grew up in New Orleans, studied at the University of Dallas, which is where I first encountered Dante, both in their core curriculum there, where we read the comedy, and then also when we went to Rome for a semester, I had an opportunity to visit Florence and see some of the Dante sites. And after university, I started writing a lot, and really came back to Dante just to try to improve my own poetry, to try to look at a master in a different language, in order to try to embrace the language in a new way, and to try to come up with better ways for myself to become a poet. So that's kind of what brought me to this. It is astonishing to delve into the poem in this way, especially at this sort of juncture in history. It's a poem which for me at first was sort of mired in just the scholarship. It was something that was hard for me to get into as poetry, rather than just as kind of a classical survey of everything, which it is in many ways. And so it was really amazing to just get to know the text intimately. And I'm very grateful to have shared in the project with Tim and with Sebastian over the past year.
That's great. Thank you, Danny. Tim?
Hi, I'm Tim Schmalz, sculptor. I've been a Christian sculptor for more than 30 years. And it's interesting because when I was around 16 or 17, I fell in love with Rodin. I thought his sculptures were just the best. And that drew me into becoming acquainted with Dante. I'm not sure if very many people know, but The Thinker, one of the most famous sculptures, obviously I think it's the most famous sculpture that Rodin created, was actually initially called The Pud, and it was supposed to be a small mid-size sculpture of Dante that was going to be worked in his Gates of Hell. And I think so. It's interesting, the connection between artwork and Dante, and being in love with Christian artwork. Obviously, I've come across the great masters and the interpretations of Dante. And it was after I actually created a massive sculpture, a 20-foot bronze sculpture on the theme of migration, that when I was finished this huge project, I was really hungry for another one. And I always thought that Dante, the whole Divine Comedy, would just be an amazing project, because there has been an emphasis on the Inferno over the centuries, represented in artwork, and very little on Purgatory and Paradise. And I thought that, wouldn't it be great to actually sculpt every single canto? So I started sculpting, and then I thought, well, is there an interesting date that I should be aware of to perhaps conclude this project. Only then did I realize the 700th anniversary was coming up. And so that kind of gave me the fuel to keep going and to work on the project. Literally, I just finished Canto 32 of A Paradise, and that's 99 cantos last week. Isn't that fascinating? But so, yeah, I'm ready to talk and share the experiences about spending a year sculpting Dante.
Tim, let me pick up precisely on that point. I'd like to ask each of you to respond to a question about how your work of translating and sculpting through the entire poem, how has that changed your way of relating to it, to the poem? When I'm teaching Dante in an academic setting, I sometimes talk about the idea that a work of art, whether it's written or plastic, requires the viewer to adopt a contemplative point of view. That is, a point of view that goes beyond the surface of the work, whether that be the texture of words or the line and skin of a plastic piece, to the level of its soul or its meaning. Has your way of experiencing the meaning of the text changed because of the work you've done? And if so, how? Danny, let me start with you again.
Yeah, it's changed a great deal. And I think it has a lot to do with what I mentioned earlier about how when I first encountered Dante, it was through this very, very thick lens of scholarship, which of course is tremendously valuable. But especially at the time, I was an obsessive sort of reader where, every other line I had to flip back to the endnotes and read and then flip back to the poem. So there was a really disjointed way that I experienced it. And also I read it pretty quickly, just I think in the context of most sort of survey courses, you end up going through a text at maybe a more rapid clip than you might otherwise like. So coming back and really examining the text over the course of a year and not really looking at any scholarship in the process was a totally different experience. It really showed me so much of the humanity of Dante, and that on several levels. The first being that I think when you just read the text sort of slowly as a poem, and try not to get too bogged down in figuring out what everything refers to exactly, you get a real sense of the struggle that Dante as a man has. And that's reflected in the poetry. I mean, how many times throughout the poem does he lose his sight or faint or just get overwhelmed by either sense experience or by sort of intellectual experience as he ascends through the sort of hierarchy of being. And so that you get this deeper and deeper sort of personal connection with the poet, not only as an artist, but also as just a human being who through the art is kind of going through the process of becoming more and more human. There's a line in Paradiso when he says that not just that he ascended from one sphere of heaven to the other, but that he was translated. And so I think there's a real sense in which through the act of producing the text, Dante is translating himself into what he wants to become. And so I think I was able to sort of sense that much more in this reading, and in the process of translating to join in that sort of personal translation that Dante is aiming at.
Danny, let me follow up on your comment by asking you to talk a little bit about what difference you think it makes that Dante so very self-consciously decided to write the poem in the vulgar tongue, that is the everyday, ordinary Tuscan of his community, as opposed to following the epic tradition of writing in Latin and the theological and scholarly tradition of using Latin as opposed to vulgar Tuscan?
Yeah, I think it makes the two sort of immediate differences that come up for me. One, of course, is just allowing greater access to the poem to a wider variety of people. And I think it's really amazing to look at sort of the peasant tradition of engagement with Dante throughout Italian history, of just like, relatively uneducated people who are able to recite the poem in its entirety, which is really amazing, I think. But then there's also, I think as a poet, it allows Dante greater freedom in a lot of ways. So like one of the challenges, I think, for someone writing in English today, for example, is that it has such a history to it. So like there are certain words that you can't use without, like Shakespeare sort of looming over your shoulder when you use them. And in the Italian, I think Dante finds a certain freedom that he might not have had if he had struck out via the Latin. I think in a lot of ways he would always have Virgil kind of over his shoulder, which he does, of course, already, but it allows him to take that tradition that he has from Virgil and to press the language in new ways that I think might not have been available to him in Latin.
Thank you, Danny. Tim, same question. How has your contemplative practice changed through this process? You, of course, had already developed an extensive visual, pictorial vocabulary and a sense of the power of making as a way of seeing. Was there anything particular that you learned from Dante and from the poem in doing this series?
Thank you. It was very interesting because immediately I realized that it was not just going to be a sculpture to be created, but because of it's a long haul project. I in a sense incorporated into my prayer life and my whole year, and so let me just describe the year for you. Most every single day I would wake up at 4:00 in the morning and I would start sculpting. And most every single evening I would read actually text of Dante. Throughout the day I would be reading audio unabridged versions of the work. So I was really quite involved. At the end of reading at nighttime, I would look at how other artists specifically represented that canto I was working on, or those collections of cantos I was working on. And I'd usually take at a time. It seemed to be easy. One time I tried to do 10, and it was almost overwhelming. So I would get myself into the structure of morning and nighttime with Dante. And this is through a pandemic. And it's I think it was one of the most fascinating almost coincidences, because here Dante in exile, and in a sense all of Italy, and then it became all of the world was in its kind of this exile. And what I found with Dante is this and what I feel that was so refreshing, even when I was in the Inferno, is the structure he had. And it was so refreshing to in a world that seemed so chaotic, to have your companion, someone that black is black and white is white. And so it was really fascinating to walk with Dante through his journey and have that refreshing idea that there is those absolutes out there. And so I guess really for the idea of doing sculpture, it really brought kind of the structure in my life, and I saw how he was representing the structure of the universe, and it was just absolutely remarkable. And so I think I learned about that it is a comedy, but it's so, every aspect of it breathes so much life into one, especially today in modern day times, reading Dante today. So I think it's what it made me realize is it's so relevant today, and so much almost like something that gives you so much peace today in today's times. So yeah.
Tim, a quick follow-up on that. There are several things I'd love to follow up on with you, but for now, pick one. You talked about the importance and the value and the enjoyment of structure, both in your own day and in the context of the poem. Are there elements of structure that you think are central to your way of illuminating and illustrating in sculpture the meaning of the poem? For example, and this is a very amateur question, but in the full sense of that word, I love what you've done with these, but I don't have technical or expert knowledge. Is there a mandala structure in many of your illustrations, or is there some other repeated motif that you use to design structure to give continuity and unity to the works?
Well, I think the interesting thing is the format of them. I did them a little bit larger than a page. So I can't use 22 inches by 14 inches. And that was, and I did not deviate from that. I was very tempted to, oh, this is a great candle, I'm going to make it big, but I kept that structure so it's like a page. And with that framework, that size was specifically created so the person that views it has a sense that they're looking at a page. And also, for me, it very much limited it put me in a box, in a sense, that I had this space to deal with. Now let me see what I can do with that. And also, like Danny said, Dante, and I'm sure you're aware of Dante, you can get quite deep quite quick with it. And what I thought of is, Tim, it's not necessarily about me. It's not about me, it's about Dante. So I wanted to be in the background. I wanted Dante to be obviously front and center, and I wanted as best as possible for me to disappear. And so I wanted to be as authentic as the text as possible, but I couldn't get too esoteric in each canto because I felt like I was like a war artist. You know, those war artists that would go out in the field and sketching. I'm actually sculpting now, but just like the war artist sketching on the battlefield doesn't know what necessarily the general's doing and what the master maps are, but I'm documenting a certain aspect of Dante, and I was happy with that. And and also the structure was, who's my audience? My audience with this is principally the person who has never read Dante before. And when I first started this, I thought everyone knew Dante, like my kids do. But I realized my kids only know Dante like they're 10 and 14. But the only reason why they know Dante is because I've been talking about it for so long, right? But it's fascinating how many people now are not reading Dante. And so if sculpture can act as kind of a tool to get people excited, and I'm gonna try to find those money shots and bring it forward and say, hey, look, this is exciting. Start reading Dante.
That's wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Tim. As I suggested to the two of you before we started. I think it might be useful if we tried to zero in a little bit in the way you were describing the framing of each canto. Tim, zero in on an example of one canto and ask each of you to comment on your experience of working on that particular canto. In order to do that, I'm going to try sharing my screen. Let's hope it works, and I'll get us to a shared text. We'll start with the verbal. So this is Canto 23 of the Paradiso. It's one of the Marian cantos in which Mary plays a central role. There are many of those, but this is one of the most lovely, and it also, I think, is appropriate to the theme of the day, the theme of the Annunciation, the Feast of the Annunciation that we're celebrating today. Danny, could I ask you to start just by reading your words there, and then talk just a bit about the experience of trying to translate from the Italian into the English, and what the choices, some of the choices that you were making as you went.
Sure. As the bird among the beloved fronds reposed in the nest of her sweet chicks through the night that obscures things from us, who, desiring to see their faces and to retrieve the food with which they're satisfied, in which grave labor she's gladdened, awaits the time in an open branch above, and expects the sun with ardent affection, fixedly gazing there where the dawn's born. So my lady stood erect and attentive, turned back toward the place below which the sun shows least haste, such that seeing her suspended and pensive, I was made as he who, desiring another's will, is appeased in hoping. Yeah, so this is, I was glad that you selected this canto, Frank, because it's so beautiful. And as I was looking back over it, what really stands out for me about the beauty of this canto is that it's carried along by these incredible similes. And looking back over it, I was struck by just how many similes there are throughout the canto, because it's, you start off and you get kind of this amazing opening one, about the mother bird, which really sticks in your memory. And then you get toward the end, the one about the infant reaching up to the mother. But then if you look throughout it, there are all these other ones. And there's a structure to the similes that I think really well accentuates the whole movement of the canto and kind of encapsulates the whole movement of the comedy as a whole. So you have the image of the mother bird, which there are all these resonances associated with that. There's the thought of flight, of ascending. There's also the thought of our weakness kind of relative to God and our dependence on his grace. Then we have the simile of the moon and stars. So again, we're ascending higher and higher. Then Dante's mind is likened to the lightning that crashes to the ground. And there's a sense there still of the mind's ascent, then reaching some point where it's forced back downward. Then we have the simile of the poem needing to leap over this gap, this sort of impasse it's come to in trying to figure paradise. And Dante uses the word figurando, they're figuring paradise, which some people will translate just as represent or showing paradise. But I think it's worth, and this is kind of my sort of whole idea about how to translate the poem, is to try as much as possible to stay close, to say as literal as you can. Because that to figure paradise suggests not only Dante's attempt to sort of physically represent the spiritual lineaments of the place, but it's also referring to like figures as far as the figures of speech that the mind requires to try to make that ascent. And that's where I think so much of the poetry of the comedy comes into play, is in those figures of speech not only in these kind of big classical similes that we get throughout the poem, but also in just very small phrases and words that Dante uses throughout. Something like that figuring even.
Danny, let me ask you to extend what you just said. Look at the last two words, or last two lines rather, of that passage that you read. I was made as he who, desiring another's will, is appeased in hoping. Those lines seem to me to be extraordinary. What do you hear going on in there?
Yeah, one thing that's so interesting about Dante, and in this he's drawing, I think, really heavily on the Latin poetry tradition. There's this way of using apposition in lines to sort of physically demonstrate the kind of enveloping, the kind of involution of wills and desires that's involved in the poem. So there's that reflection between the self and the other in those lines that is bound up in the very structure of the lines themselves. And it's just, it's incredible the attention that Dante has, not just to the ideas that he's putting forth, but to the way that you can best put them forth in order to carry the poem along and to give it its energy.
Wonderful, thank you. And as a transition now to Tim, Danny, can I ask you to read through this next passage, because it's in part at least the focus of Tim's sculpture.
Sure. There descended into the heaven a little lamp, formed in a circle in the guise of a crown, and it cinctured her and wheeled all about her. Whatever melody sounds most sweet there below, and most draws the soul to itself, would seem a cloud scarred of thunder, compared to the sound of that lyre with which the lovely sapphire was crowned, that which ensaphires the heaven most clear. I am angelic love, who wheel about the lofty joy that breathed from the womb which was home of our desire. And I will wheel about you, Lady of Heaven, until you follow your son, and make the supreme sphere the more divine for your entry there.
Tim, here is your vision of not simply those passages, but the entire canto. What are we seeing in this in terms of your imagination bringing to life the texture of the canto that Danny was translating?
Yes, here you have I like that you use the word texture, because I wanted to create within the angel wings that you can see there. Well, first of all, when I create a piece, there's one thing that I'm kind of looking on in two levels. I'm looking on it as obviously an independent piece of artwork, but also the design of it. Does it have does it kind of capture kind of the feeling of that canto? And so that's, you can see kind of the general shape of the piece. It looks very lyrical, especially with the I can't touch it, but especially with the filigree of the angelic figures that are surrounding the area. And one of the interesting things, before I would start to do a canto, and I started to do this basically after Inferno, actually midway through Inferno, I realized that I don't necessarily have to have Beatrice and Dante, or Virgil and Dante, in every single canto. Mm-hmm. And because not only because it becomes tiring sculpting them, but it just visually it becomes redundant. So when I hit Purgatory, I started to kind of focus more on the scene as if you are the eyes of Dante looking. There are some times where I'll put Dante work within it, right? But also I'm trying to capture the beauty, the expression, and the figures that Dante narrates himself, and to work with that in a way that, as you can see, some of the striations of the work have very little detail on this piece. And it's hard because when you're dealing with paradise, you're dealing with so many ethereal heavenly things, and then to transfer them over to clay, which is going to be in bronze, it becomes very difficult. One of the things I love about Dante is oftentimes he says what he's seen is almost impossible to describe, or it is impossible to describe. That's when the artist comes in a sense, and, oh great, I can work this way. But the hope is that each of these pieces become an independent, standalone piece, and the ambiguity in that specific canto just hopefully enhances the whole project. A piece like this, I would have to be concerned about what's a canto prior, and or what's surrounding this piece too. I love Gustav Dory's work, but we don't need another Gustav Dory. and I love Botticelli. I love William Blake. I find it amazing that William Blake on some of his was crazy in how he interpreted some of the cantos. And I think William Blake gave me the creative freedom that I can read text and kind of press into the sculpture my own experience without being as pedantic and detailed as someone like Gustav Dory, who did these wonderful etchings here. So this is just a kind of a impression that when someone comes to it, by no means is it a translation of the text, but it will hopefully inspire them. And as they're reading the translation, we'll find it as a nice supplement.
Great, thank you, Tim. Obviously, we could very happily go on for a long, long time talking about your experiences here. We do want to give the audience an opportunity for questions. So in making a transition, let me just point out something that Tim was just talking about, the angel figure here in minimal, to some extent, to minimal detail, but we know that the gesture is meant to be a crowning gesture. He's circling her to acknowledge that she is to be the queen of heaven. And we get that in Danny's translations. As I wheel about you, Lady of Heaven, until you follow your son and make the supreme sphere the more divine for your entry there. How extraordinary. What an extraordinary thing to say. That Mary's presence, the presence of her crowning action as a human being, the yes that she says on this Feast of the Annunciation, this will make heaven more divine than it's been without her. And that takes us all the way back to Dante and the Vita Nuova, the one great poem that emerges from that collection, O ladies who have understanding of love. And in that poem, he names Beatrice as the one who is desired in heaven above. And in this way, Dante closes the circle from the beginning of his poetry to the end of his poetry with this taking into heaven of a woman who makes the place more divine. Absolutely stunning, I think. All right. So for those of you in the audience who would like to pose a question or make a comment, now is the time to do so. We're all holding our breath a little bit in the hope that we can manage this in a fairly reasonable way. But if you have a question, I suggest that you, at the bottom of your screen, there's a section that I think says reactions, and you'll see a little icon there that is equivalent to raising your hand. So if you'd like to ask a question, please do that.
Hi, this is Ed Hogan. I've got a question for Danny. Hey, Danny, I'm hoping you can help me out with a little frustration I had the last time I read Dante. I just had to walk away because there are points at which he seemed more concerned with how he was saying things than what he was saying. And I totally believe that there's a relationship between what you say and how you say it. And what you say needs to be true, and how you say it needs to be true and beautiful. And what you say could be true, but if how you say it is false and ugly, that's not helping your project. So one of the things I love about Robert Frost is not his rhyme scheme so much as his meter, that how he says things really matters to me. And when I write, I try to write in a way that really speaks love as well as truth. So I get that. But I was just so frustrated with him because he seemed to be focused on how he was saying things. What's your experience of the relationship between what Dante is saying and how he's saying it? And how does that factor into your own translation work?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the question. And it's it's interesting that you bring up Frost on a number of levels, because he's so cool as far as you say there, his dealing with meter, and the way that he stretches the patterns of everyday speech across traditional formal structures is really amazing. It's also funny you bring him up because he said that, what is it he said, that poetry is what is lost in translation? So I think that's one of the difficulties of approaching Dante as well, is that we do have to engage in some level on an act of, in an act of translation, and it can be really easy to lose the poetry there. I think there are a couple of different levels on which we might approach kind of the difficulty that you're expressing there. In the first place, it can be, I find my difficulties with Dante come in one where it just seems, sometimes it does seem like he's, I guess, I don't know if it's maybe an Italian thing, but he really likes to hammer on a point sometimes. And it's kind of, there are moments when it's kind of like Tolstoy at the end of War and Peace, where it just goes on for pages and pages about how stupid Napoleon was. You're like, geez, Tolstoy, like, rein it in, man. Let's get back to the story. And you sometimes encounter moments like that with Dante. I think part of the difficulty too is that we have a lot of translations that don't do justice to the simplicity of Dante's poetry, because he is more than most other poets, someone who kind of relaxes in the simplicity of language. And for the most part, he's very clear and direct. And I think it's really in the Italian that, of course, the poetry can shine, because it's just such a lovely language in itself. And it's really difficult to bring the beauty of the Italian into any other tongue, I think. So I think that's probably a big part of the difficulty, is just that, we're separated by the language, which can make it hard. But I've really tried in this translation to bring out kind of the lovely spare simplicity that he has. And there, of course, there are places where it can be a tough poem to get through. But, at the same time, I think always he's striving to bring the language into the most beautiful relation to the idea that he's trying to put forth. And I think he, especially in Purgatorio and Paradise, really gets as close as anybody can.
Thanks for your question, Ed. Anyone else? We have a question from Stephanie Ruotso to everyone. Stephanie, do you want to go ahead and state your question?
So, I mean, first of all, thank you both so much. Thank you all for doing such an amazing job to bring these great and lofty thoughts to all of us and make them accessible to us. And I was just curious, Mr. Fitzpatrick, about your process, because Italian is so inherently idiomatic, and especially when we're distanced not only by distance, physical distance, but also centuries. How do you maintain the aesthetic and the connotation while also being cognizant of denotation and making that comprehensible to us?
Yeah, another great question, and a difficult one to answer in a lot of ways. I always get very, very nervous about talking about this project, just because I'm so inexpert about it. Like I throughout the whole project, I've had that line from is it A Man for All Seasons, when Richard Rich tells the court that Thomas More said that Parliament hath not the competence to make the judgments it has. So I always feel that like he hath not the competence for this project. But I think the main ways that I've tried to do it are just by leaning on the resources that are available to me. So part of my project has been reading a lot of different translations. And so looking at the Italian and examining, how does Hollander deal with it? How does Ciardi deal with it? How does, however many translations we have, there's so many. And there's all that richness that you can gather there by looking at the other attempts that we have out there. Part of it also is just by, I guess, just kind of trusting a poetic instinct, and just kind of looking at it as an act of poetry in itself, in the process of translation. And that's dangerous because, of course, part of my goal has been to try to be as faithful as possible to Dante. And I, as a young student, spent a lot of time translating Virgil. And then I would read English translations and get frustrated that they didn't get passages that I really loved the way that I thought they should be, from having spent a lot of time studying the text. And so there's that sort of danger that you don't want to do the thing then that frustrates you in other people. But I think something else that helps with Dante is that there is a shared sort of worldview that we get with Dante by way of his Aristotelian and Thomistic sort of cosmology. And so I think having that philosophical framework in mind helps to create a kind of continuity with those of us today who are still studying the same things as Dante did, that helps to embrace the text in the most faithful way that I can, at least.
We have another question. James Hennick, please.
Compare and contrast, if you will, starting with Danny, your work and that of Dorothy Sayers. Every time I'm tempted to buy another translation of Dante, I think, will the footnotes, the scholarly footnotes, compare or not? And of course, the scholarly footnotes aren't as important as the translation, but blimey, if you haven't got the scholarship, I don't know how you're going to really do the translation. So you didn't mention Dorothy Sayers, but I'm sure you want to say something about her, so please go ahead.
Sure. So Frank and I were discussing this last week, actually. And kind of what you've alluded to, I think, is the real treasure trove of Sayers, being the notes, because she's just got such a good understanding of, I think, the spiritual vision that Dante brings to bear on the poetry. Now, I think on the I think on the poetic side, she runs into some of the difficulties that are inherent in trying to take Dante's form and transpose it in as formally similar a way as possible into the English, just because of the difficulty of rhyming coming across from Italian to English. But yeah, I think the notes are the real treasure there.
Thank you.
Tim, there's a question for you from Suzanne. Suzanne, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read it, but feel free to follow up. Tim, your sculptures, I love your sculptures and the tool marks you show. What kind of modeling clay and armatures do you use?
Oh, thank you. I don't use any armatures on these sculptures. Essentially what I do is I have a board, I press the clay on the board, and then I start sculpting. The interesting thing with the clay is that it's just standard clay with no grog. That means no sand or anything. It's a purified clay. What I found with that is there is only a certain amount of detail I could put in on each piece. The Ghiberti doors, they're done in wax. And a lot of relief sculptures that you see are done in wax. You can go crazy with detail on that. And if I would have chosen a wax that I've used for 20 years, 30 years on small pieces, I would never have got done the piece. So the idea of using standard clay safeguard me for keeping them very impressionistic. And so, yes, the tool marks are there. In a sense, also, I finished, the pieces were done when I literally, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually felt there was nothing more to add. And then it would have just been titillating. It would have been, oh, let's get this ringlet of hair more detailed. So it was a great process because of that material. Thanks.
Great. We have time perhaps for one more question. Tim?
Danny, can I ask you how it feels to be done? And just tell me your experiences. For me, I feel like, oh my God, what do I do now? And it's just like, it was such a year of amazing intensity that I'm excited to find another project similar to it. Looking around, I'm thinking I need to get my teeth into something. How about you?
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of relief at having reached the end. I mean, it's such a detailed work, and something that just draws you in on so many levels and challenges you constantly. So yeah, there's a tremendous sense of relief at being done, but also there's that kind of longing that's tied in with the end of the poem. And something that's so interesting just throughout the poem is there's that constant motion back to the beginning. And there's that sense that as long as we remain in this life, there's always the chance of being back in the wood at the beginning. And there's always a longing for the end. And it was really moving to finally step away from it, and just to kind of bask in the glory of the poem.
You mentioned, Tim, that you found it amazing that people weren't familiar with Dante. And having taught undergraduates for 40 years, I don't find it amazing in the least. However, just to let you know something of the cultural context, I have a nephew who has written for the New York Times, graduated from the University of Michigan, and saw a picture of Dr. Samuel Johnson, didn't know who it was. And when I gave him to look at, not to take, Boswell's biography of Johnson said, I didn't even know about this. I had no idea about this. And here's someone who is decidedly literate. And I think we can never forget how chaotic the culture is. We need to be reminded once a day at least. So that's more of a rant than a question.
I'll answer it. I think that you're 100% right that in this world today, with the iPhones, with all the social media, great works, great poetry, great works of philosophy are at risk. And I think that, like for instance, the first book, actually the books I'm reading right now, the Dantes, are from my father's library. He had a physical library. I could go down and pick up his Plato's Republic. I could pick up these books. And if he had them on a tablet, I don't think I ever would have discovered them that easy. But I think is that artwork has that power to introduce. People can read with their eyes a lot quicker than going to a library or buying the book. And that's why I think that what I like to think is that it's a tool. Sculpture artwork can be a tool to get people inspired, get more people reading.
Tim, you're going to get the absolute last word here apart from our closing prayer. What's going to happen in Florence on September 14th?
Whoa.
Well, the sculpture project that I just said was done is not done. All right, I was lying. I have one more canto to do. I have canto 33 of Paradise, and I'm saving it because I am going to be live sculpting it in September on the anniversary of Dante. And all of the, it's going to be amazing. I want to be right up on the bell tower, but they're talking about having me in one of the chapels. But it's going to be the final conclusion, the completion of the 100 cantos. And then in the Badia, there's going to be the bronzes, the relief sculptures, and my portrait of Dante. So it's going to be quite exciting. Actually, right now, some of the reliefs are being poured, cast in bronze, and they're getting ready to be shipped over now. So it's very, very exciting.
On behalf of all of us, thanks and congratulations to Tim, to Danny, and also to Sebastian, who again is the moving spirit behind the actual process of making all of this come together. And in closing, I'd like to ask Ed Hogan if he would lead us in prayer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord God Almighty, when Mary gave her consent, the Holy Spirit overshadowed her, and there was a tremendous moment of creativity. Something new came to be. The eternal Word took on flesh, and your plan for the salvation of humanity took its decisive turn. When artists give their consent to the sparks of the Holy Spirit that fall upon them and well up within them, an echo of that creativity happens again. By their works of poetry, sculpture, and translation, something new comes to be, an echo of the eternal Word that fires our imagination. As we celebrate the Feast of the Annunciation, we ask you to send the Holy Spirit upon each of us gathered here. We are artists, teachers, scholars, administrators, and so many other things in the world. Fill our work with Spirit-inspired creativity. Through our thoughts and desires, our plans, conversations, and actions, may the creativity of Jesus Christ startle the world once again. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you very much, Ed, and thanks to our audience for joining us. Let's end on a note of hope that today is the beginning of a new phase of this project, that it will bring Dante to the greater attention of more people, to the improvement of the world in which we live, and especially to the aid of Italy, which was the original goal of the project. All good wishes, and thank you.